I got to travel to Israel with in 2019. So for the NAMAT International Convention. So welcome to everyone.
Yes, welcome to everybody. Thank you for joining us for our fundraising workshop. All right, if you have a little square that says we're recording, you have to click it to get rid of that square. I know we've had issues in the past with that, right, Doris? Okay, so I'd like to welcome you all to this very exciting training session with Barbara Labbie. And we have for our tech support, her husband, Robert. So we thank you both for joining us this evening. And we're going to learn how to get comfortable with the ask, which most of us are not comfortable doing with person-to-person fundraising. I want to share with you a little bit about Barbara. She is a very talented member of our organization. She's also a lifetime member of NAMAT out of Pittsburgh. And those of you who attended our last convention got to see some of her handiwork when she did that movie for us. She's a filmmaker and due to the pandemic has returned to being a fundraising professional, working from home. Previously, Barbara has worked on behalf of clients like the Sierra Club, the Southern Poverty Law Center, and Habitat for Humanity. In just over 8 years, Barbara raised close to $2 million. Impressive. Barbara Labbie currently works for Blueprint Advancement, a company that specializes in fundraising for performing arts organizations, such as the New York Opera and Hartford Symphony Orchestra. She's their #1 acquisition caller. Very impressive again. Barbara has also coached, trained, and mentored and loves to help fundraisers like us be highly effective at obtaining donations on behalf of worthwhile organizations like NAMAT. And now I'm handing the floor over to Barbara.
Thank you. Thank you. It's so wonderful to see so many friendly faces. Thank you so much. I'm honored that so many of you are taking this evening to be here. So yes, this talk is called Getting Comfortable with the Ask. So why ask person to person? And I say person to person because it used to be perhaps one would get together for lunch or coffee and ask in person. But these days with the pandemic, it might be over the phone or over Skype or Google Meet or Zoom like we are here. And the difference between that versus a letter, an appeal letter or an email is that talking person to person is dynamic versus static. A letter gives the case that was selected for that letter or email, whereas in a person-to-person ask, you can feel out the person you're talking to and have a sense of what would best move them, and then ask for amounts that seem appropriate given the circumstance, and then address objections. A letter can't address objections. And maybe that's why when people mail out direct mailers, often it's considered a great success when there's a 3 to 4% response rate. And with person-to-person asking, it can be as high as 70%. That's for in-person asking when somebody knows pretty much what's coming. As far as over the phone, it can be very common to hit 35%. It depends on the type of appeal though, and we're going to talk about type of appeal in a moment. So why give? Obviously, giving is a way to connect to humanity and to our community. And I want to encourage everyone here, when we're asking people for support, first of all, there are many ways to support, but also it's a health booster to contribute and be a part of something and to give. So what you're really doing is you're giving people an opportunity to boost their health, to boost their mood, to feel good about participating. So if you see it that way, you should feel really good about going to someone and offering them membership or an opportunity to participate and help out. So we talk about cultivation, and I like that term. You've probably heard that term before in regards to fundraising, that it's kind of like a garden. You have to tend to it. So in talking to people, I want you to not be too turned off if you hear a rejection. I mean, that's today, that's how people feel now, but there's a long game. And maybe over time, people may change their mind and be moved, or the circumstances may change and they might then choose to come on board. So, a question that I heard in another session dealing with fundraising, which I thought was very good, and so I'm bringing it up, and it is probably a common question, is so how often should we reach out to prospects? And I liked the speaker's answer, so I'm going to reiterate it here. And that is that donors are often like friends. Some friendships you need to tend to regularly, maybe talk to the person once a month or every other week. Some friends you can pick up with and connect with every 3 months, and that's wonderful for that friendship. So donors are a lot like that. It's not one size fits all, and really asking people how often they like to be contacted, giving them those options is the way to go. So obviously there, as you probably well know, are two types of giving. There's time and there's treasure. And so I just want to quickly cover some terminology, since I think many of you already know this, if not most of you, but we'll go through it nonetheless. So time or treasure. In-kind contribution. When you hear that term, I hope you all know, or will know now, that means a good or a service donated to an organization. Like my giving this talk is a service. Whereas when catering is donated for a function, that's obviously a good. So you can put together a whole event with having a band donated. Somebody's cousin is fronting a band, and maybe they'll participate and make that an in-kind donation. You get food donated in kind, perhaps in exchange for a program ad. A hotel will give you a room for an afternoon, and that's also an in-kind donation. So while financial support is really important, there are some benefits, and it can be just as good to have in-kind contributions. So obviously the second one we know well, financial. So I want to briefly go over the types of fundraising campaigns. So earlier in the introduction, Deb kindly mentioned how well I do on acquisitions. So what that is acquiring support from people who haven't contributed before, as you may know. And these are some of the more tough campaigns, obviously, because more education is needed. It's not like when you're renewing support and you just need to have people be reminded of what they love about the organization. Here, we're introducing people to the organization, or introducing them to the idea of supporting the organization that perhaps they've already attended an event for, but they haven't joined yet. Another great acquisition list might be of Hadassah members, because Hadassah members often also support Naamat. They're like-minded women who care about what's happening in Israel for women and children, or women who belong to other Zionist organizations. These would be great acquisition leads. And as many of you know, renewals, obviously renewing membership support for another year. Lapsed renewals would be former members that maybe haven't belonged in a year or two, and we're hoping to bring them back on board as members. And deep lapse, these can be a little challenging because there's probably a reason why they haven't belonged in over 3 years or over 5 years. However, your organization, or however Naamat defines a deep lapsed renewal. But with the proper outreach, some of these people can be brought back on board. Appeals. So when you hear the words appeal, obviously that's an appeal for support or of some kind, usually monetary, and a request of members to give beyond their yearly membership dues. With Naamat, that would be, for example, the Daycare Plus campaign, or International Women's Day, when we were asked to support some more. Then we've got two types of appeals. There's the one-time gift appeal. That's obviously sort of self-explanatory. It's given generally once, but it could be a gift that's a little larger, broken up into specific payments, such as the $3,500 that would approximately provide care for 1 year for a horse at the Connote Youth Village. So that could be split up, say, into 7 months of $500 each. But it's still considered a one-time gift because there would be a finite end to when that gift is paid off clearly, and that would then be done. So obviously, sustainer campaigns seek unlimited ongoing monthly support. And this is like Na'amat's GEM supporters, people that have agreed to have support withdrawn every month, generally by EFT or credit card. And here you see some of the levels. It's nicely done. So I want to offer you a quick framework for how to think about putting together a script for Na'amat calls, or for any organization you're fundraising for. Obviously, you want to answer this question. Who does your organization serve? And people love stories, so the story form is best, obviously. If you'll recall from my documentary, if you saw it, there was Gloria Elbling telling a story about a man who couldn't stand the noise his children made. So he would lock the children and his wife in this closet. And it was the women's shelters that Na'amat, the specific women's shelter in particular that Na'amat had that took the wife and children in, and as she would say, and saved them. So that's a story where you might think, well, I want to save other families that are going through distress like that. And that might move some to contribute. So basically, obviously, Na'amat does so many wonderful things. It can be sometimes hard to summarize it. As you know, Na'amat deals with disadvantaged youth, addresses domestic violence, provides legal assistance, scholarships. So perhaps the overarching rubric would be Na'amat makes families healthier, safer, and stronger with its programs. So the second question, any good appeal, person-to-person appeal would also answer is, what will this money be used for? So, for example, with the horses in Connote Village, you might say, well, there's expenses at the 1,500 level. You could provide equipment for a horse. You could provide a saddle. You would be providing at the 3,500 level care for the horse for a year, food and veterinary care. So you can give people a picture of what their money might be used for. A recent appeal to the Ashkelon Center, for the Ashkelon Center, was for replacing toys and books in the daycare center. And so you can give people that image of, oh, I'll be purchasing books, I'll be purchasing school supplies, I'll be purchasing Legos, that sort of thing that need to be replaced because kids have put them in their mouths and there's all sorts of germs on them. So unfortunately, with the pandemic, one needs to replace that. And here's the final question. Why now? What's the urgency? So in that instance, the urgency would be obviously the upcoming school year, and that's why they would need to be replaced. So looking at this particular letter, I'm hoping we can have a little bit of participation, even though there's a lot of us. And maybe Deanna, you could call on people if you see people have raised their physical hand or raised their hand under the reaction tab. I'm wondering if we could use this as an exercise and turn this into a script based on the three criteria I just outlined, being who does your organization serve, for what will the money be used, and what's the sense of urgency. So who is being served if we were turning this into a person-to-person appeal or like a fundraising script, who would be served?
So if anybody wants to speak, I see Debbie's hand up.
Well, obviously, we serve daycare centers, children in daycare centers. Somebody else want to name all the other stuff we do? Otherwise, I'll name.
Well, no, I'm thinking particularly with this letter. So with this letter, what dovetailing on what you said, it would be families from disadvantaged homes. In this letter, in the third sentence, with your help, these at-risk children from disadvantaged homes. So that would be who would be we'd be serving. So what is the request here for then? What would the money be used for?
So not only are these families disadvantaged and are the children disadvantaged, but it happens to be, this particular daycare center happens to be in the south, which is near the Gaza border, where we all know there's the rockets are constantly being launched, and these kids have, seconds to get into the safe room. And there's a lot of trauma and a lot of problems in these particular families and the kids. And at this particular multi-purpose daycare center, along with a lot of our others, we provide counseling and support. And even though the children are little, there's a lot of work that we do with them with professional help that come in, that are part of our NATMAT professionals and their families. We also help their families.
Yes, those are fantastic details. And if you were putting together a fundraising script, those would be probably great details for a second ask and a third ask to go deeper each time with a little more information. That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that, Deanna. So what would the money be used for? Does anyone see in this appeal what the money would be used for?
It's me. It's in the letter. It says specifically important renovations for the classrooms and playgrounds. So it's for the physical plant that the physical structure that the kids would be learning in and developing in, that you want it to be a place that is comfortable and has the educational tools that these children would need.
Yes, absolutely. Right. So
and that gives to me a sense of urgency. This is not an ideal scenario. The people may be the best of intentions, but the physical plant needs important work to make it the best place it could be to serve the goals and objectives of the daycare.
Yeah, we have it in there, classrooms and playgrounds for renovations.
Yes,
Gail
this isn't a trick exercise. You're right.
Yeah, but sometimes you have to reiterate what's in the letter because they've gotten this letter, but do they remember what they read? Probably not.
Or maybe they didn't read it.
Right.
And there are details to this letter that or some of the details that go beyond this letter, such as what Deanna provided, that could be provided in a person-to-person appeal that just really can't be provided in a short letter. Although this is a very well done letter, and I want to give props to Susan Neubauer, Roz Porton, and Jane Rosenblum for it.
Thank you.
Linda has a contribution.
Linda.
Unmute, Linda. Linda, you got to unmute.
I just did. Thank you. So what I like is that safe and nurturing environment is an open-ended option. And that means that if somebody may not feel comfortable or excited about giving money for renovations, in fact, if they wanted to do anything that was specific for bringing in toys or enrichment programs or other kinds of things that would make it a better experience or more, not necessarily better, but a more enriching situation, we would never say no. So it's got to be this or nothing else. I like the fact that we have that open-ended option.
Mhm, mhm. Okay, yes, for sure. And with this, the main thrust is renovations for classrooms and playgrounds, but in talking about emotional support and services, one could also imagine that support might be given to the staff or, this does seem to be geared toward classrooms and playgrounds, but certainly support for non-mot can go to many, many different things. And the case for urgency, as I gave away earlier, is the start of the school year, or the fact that people are going back to work every day in greater numbers. So the need is growing daily. Right?
If I may, I wanted to add that the summarizing sentence actually tells you that, yes, you're giving to the daycare and to this maybe specific families, but by doing that, you provide service for the whole community, because now it becomes a healthier and better community. So I think you're doing beyond the daycare itself. And I think it's really good as a conclusion for this whole thing in the letter.
Yes, it is a wonderful appeal. And that's why I thought it merited looking at as far as thinking about, well, how would you talk about it? Because the turning a letter into appeal, for one thing, you would use contractions. You might not worry about dangling prepositions. I mean, we talk differently than we write, but we also have an opportunity to add details as we go back and forth and to pivot to what people really care about. So it may be that somebody is absolutely fine with support going toward replacing a roof, and somebody else doesn't kind of connect with the dripping water and why that would be so important. So maybe they like the thought of school supplies, and we can talk to both people in a way that they can connect with what's needed there and perhaps provide some support, give them that opportunity. So, yes.
Can I ask a question? It's Susan Isaacs, and it's great to see you again. Hi.
Hi. Yes.
In Israel. So can we backtrack a little bit? Maybe you will get to that later, but I don't have a problem telling people, what we need. I just have a problem deciding or approaching people, telling them, making it a comfortable environment, or how do you even pick the people that you're going to approach? That's my problem. Once I get their attention, or once I'm sitting down with them at a lunch or dinner or in a group, I'm fine to tell them what Namat needs and what Namat, it's just getting them, finding the right people and that's my problem when it comes to the ask.
So let me go through a little more of my presentation, and at the very end, I will address that a little bit more, especially if I haven't covered some of what you're talking about, some of what you're asking. I mean, I sort of mentioned that a little bit as far as thinking in terms of acquisitions and what are like-minded organizations. People buy lists from actually people that sell lists, but also organizations trade lists. There's all sorts of ways that one could potentially grow one's lists. So that I'll talk about that later. I would like to, since the real promise of this session was to help people get comfortable with the ask, I'm about to share with you a formula.
Barbara, Deanna, I'm not sure if this is a new hand raise, but REVVL4 Plus has their hand raised. REVVL4
Can we
Plus.
hold that to the end, and if you'd be so kind, jot down a note of what you're planning to ask. And I'm just worried I won't have time to get in everything I want to share with everyone. And maybe I'll answer your question.
Just please put it in the chat. We'd appreciate that.
Okay, so hopefully there'll be some time, and stick around, and I'm happy to answer questions. So I'm about to give you a framework that, if you remember nothing else from this presentation, I hope you remember this, because it will help you with fundraising, and it can even help you in your personal life too. And that is this. ACA. I want you to think about ACA. Now, do I mean the Affordable Care Act? No. No, I do not mean the Affordable Care Act. ACA stands for acknowledge. So we want to acknowledge people, whether it's acknowledging that they took an afternoon and came to a NAMOD event. They're not yet members, but they took some time out and they showed up at a NAMOD event, or that they previously supported. We want to acknowledge that. People like to be acknowledged. People like to feel heard and understood. So that's what I'm talking about here. Case, the C is for case. Like a lawyer, and here I have the Israeli Supreme Court, one of the courtrooms there, to bring home this point. We want to give reasons to support. Like a lawyer, we want to have a strong case and in asking for support. And you want to hold some things back. You don't want to necessarily give everything all up front. You want to have room to ask again and give a second case and give a third case. So there you go. And the final thing is ask, obviously, ask for support. And in doing so, you want to ask, obviously, for a specific amount. So here we go again. Here's the whole shooting match again. Acknowledge, case, ask. Just think ACA, ACA, ACA. Acknowledge, case, ask. It's like a waltz. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, ACA, 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 acknowledge, case, ask, acknowledge, case, ask, acknowledge, case, ask. So this is the part to really remember. And I said, this even works for your personal life. Let me give you an example. So Robert might come to me and say, I'd really like to have pizza for dinner. And I could say, nah, we're going to have lentils tonight. Now, I didn't acknowledge him there, and I was kind of dismissive and just imposed my will on him in that response. But what if I had said, oh yeah, that Mediterranean pizza that we had yesterday, that was delicious. I agree. Who doesn't love pizza? Unfortunately, Robert, as you'll recall, we had lasagna for lunch. So that would be a lot of dairy. How about we have lentils for dinner? You see how I acknowledged him? I gave a case for too much dairy. Let's have lentils instead. And then I asked him about that. So obviously, what do you think makes for a better relationship? Same thing in fundraising, acknowledging people, giving a case for support, and then asking. So we want to ask for a specific amount. You don't want to just ask for will you become a member? Because once people say no, you've got nowhere to go. But if you say, will you become a member at the $250 lifetime membership level? And then they say no to that, then obviously you can say, well, I understand that's a lot to ask, especially for a new giver. And then you can go back in and give another reason to become a NAMOD member and then ask again. So it gives you latitude to go from 250 to 100 down to the 36 or 50 or however you choose to do it based upon what people say, based upon the dynamic interaction you're having with the person-to-person ask. So obviously, after you've gone through acknowledge, case, ask, and you likely are going to be shot down. If you're asking for a decent amount of money, and you should be told no often in the first ask, otherwise you're leaving money on the table. So we obviously then need to overcome whatever objection people have. So we need to be ready for it. And this is a common one we often hear in fundraising for NAMOD. Would somebody like to sound like a skeptical potential NAMOD member and read this for us?
Sure, I'll do it.
Okay, thank you.
Why should I give my money to NAMOD, which will go to Israel, when we have great needs right here in my own community, right here in the United States?
So we hear this one a lot. So let's crowdsource. Let's work together. What are some good responses for this? It is a strong objection. It's a good objection. We get it regularly, I think. So what are some of the things you answer when people say this? Yeah, Jane, please.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah. When I used to say, I haven't done it recently, but I would say that Israel has mostly a defense budget. So social service programs are not really considered. And that's why we support them. And we believe in Israel and the people.
Great, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I think that's wonderful. Would somebody else like to share how they overcome that?
It's Linda, and I have a comment.
Yeah,
So
please.
I would say that it always makes us feel good when we give to others who are less fortunate. And in this country, we give tremendous amount of aid all around the world. Our Jewish federations not only take care of local problems, but they also give out to Jews throughout the world. So it's not an either or, but what can I do here as well as in Israel?
I like how you express that. It's not an either or. It's not a zero-sum game. I appreciate that. Very nice. Thank you. Thank
You're
you.
welcome.
Anyone
Thank you.
else?
I saw
I'm-
Jan raise her hand.
Okay. I was going to aim, I'll tell you what I'm aiming for, whether I get to it or not, is acknowledging that, yes, there are great needs in our community. And I think that we as citizens, we do respond to more than one appeal for money. So yes, we are involved in our local community, but we are also involved in the larger community, and that would be Naaman in Israel. So acknowledging, yes, there are great needs, and we can give to more than one place, not just all to one.
Yeah, I think that's right to acknowledge. And for some people's budget, we might hear some refusals based on the fact that they really can't. It obviously is good to I appreciate very much you're getting that acknowledgement in. And for me, one of the reasons why I like to give money to Israel is to honor my ancestors. So while the needs are certainly great here in Pittsburgh, I would say to people in my community, it really makes me feel good in honoring my Jewish heritage by supporting people in Israel. Are there other responses people give or could give?
I would say that another response could be that if we don't, us as Jews, if we don't help Israel, who will?
I like that. That's very pithy and right to the point there. Yes. Yes. There's also, for me, there's the notion, and I can't see everyone, so if somebody else wants to talk, I'd prefer to give them the opportunity. But
Gail has her hand up, but I'm not sure if it's from before.
Gail, do you want to offer something?
No, I'm fine. I didn't think I have my hand. Oh, I should lower it.
Okay.
That was before.
That's okay.
What about if someone is an objection to giving money, what if you ask them to instead give of their time or to help call their friends or give us other contacts that we could get in touch with to reach out to for possible donors if they don't want to donate themselves?
Maybe
I get the feeling with this person, it's not that they don't necessarily have money, it's that they want to know, why should I give to Naamat as opposed to something else?
Right.
So I think sometimes a person who is not interested in donating, she said, why should I give my money to Naamat when maybe I should be giving it to local things? So I think that this is somebody who has an objection that should be acknowledged, that they're in great needs, and we try to do the best we can to answer the many needs. And I myself give to more than one organization. And I like your answer about the connection, to connect us to Israel. And it's a very important connection. And we are like a family. We're an international community. And Israel is, as a Jew, we all feel a connection and a sense of ownership. It's our land. And that it's not just a distant place for us.
Barbara,
Yes, please.
you say, I like your ACA, even
Oh,
though it's, because that's the case. You have to give them a case
Yes, you do. And
after you acknowledge what they've said.
right. And whether you are for or against the Affordable Care Act, it's just a framework to remember it. It's
I know.
mnemonic, obviously. So
Work in healthcare.
yes. Very good. Thank you.
Barbara, I see that Linda and Amy have had their hands up. Linda?
Yeah, I was just going to say that if somebody is having an issue, I would offer them the opportunity to see one of the short videos that we have of the facilities, because as you said, with a story, you get to people's hearts. And when they see kids, it breaks their hearts.
It can. Yes, exactly. I mean, one could say, yes, there are daycare center. Like one objection I would hear regularly was, I can barely afford my own daycare center to support, to send my kids to a daycare center here. So and you want me to send money to Israel for daycare for children, for other children. And I think it can be compelling to say, yes, you obviously, if you can barely do it, then all right, that's something else. But supporting daycare centers in Israel is a little different than the daycare centers in the United States. When you think of the Ashkelon daycare center and the PTSD and trauma that these children have from hearing rocket fire, and it's a different situation than what we've got going on in the United States. So support is needed to, if one can split support, then there's a greater need, more trauma and that needs to be addressed there. And I'm sorry, I'm not being very articulate in that response, but that concept of that. And there's also the notion that the Head Start program was modeled on Naamat's programs. So it's good to support Naamat and keep them as a role model that perhaps other governments will look to for doing things right, for working with Bedouins and Arabs, and you may want to highlight this and may not want to highlight this, obviously, depending upon to whom you're sharing this. I think it's a good thing. Obviously, the more inclusive Naamat is, I think it's wonderful. And I think that it's great that the story goes that before Head Start began here in the United States, governmental representatives went to Israel, saw how Naamat handled early childhood education, and learned some things, and went back to the United States and started Head Start, basically modeling it on Naamat's early childhood education programs. So that's convincing. Why wouldn't we want to keep that going and keep that as a success story? So I'm going to move on to something.
I'm sorry. Amy also had a question or a comment.
Yeah, I was just going to say, maybe another way to handle this is to point out the successes that the program has and how well they use their money. I mean, say for instance, 90% of our funds go directly to serving the children, be a little more pragmatic, perhaps, so that people know that their money is going directly to where it's needed and that the organization is very effective.
Right. And you bring up a good point. Especially if you're talking with a very analytical person, that can be a very wonderful way to reach them. So I'm going to move on now.
Dora Shinners has a question. She's had her hand up. Dora, one last question.
If you have a comment on how to overcome its objection, that would be great. Otherwise, may I ask that you hold your question to the end, because I do have a fair number of points I'd like to share with you, and maybe I'll even get to what you're asking. Do you have a suggestion for this?
Did you want me to speak?
Do you have an objection response for some of the things we've talked about? Why should I give money to Naamat when it goes to Israel and we have needs that are great right here in the United States?
Yes, that's what I want. Well, I think we should
bring out that Israel is a very important country in this world. Israel's the eyes and ears of the Middle East.
Yes.
And helps to make us secure. And that's why it's important for us to contribute to Israel and keep Israel strong.
I think we ended on a really wonderful one. Thank you for saying that. They were all excellent, and thank you for making that addition.
Can I just make a quick comment? This is Marcy in Cleveland. I think your last point was the most important. It depends on who the person is, what your answer should be.
Absolutely.
So for, you have to be able to read your audience. So for some people, it's the pragmatic approach. For some people, it's pulling their heartstrings. So you have to know who you're giving the answer to. That's all.
Exactly. It's a dynamic interaction. It's not static. And thank you for reiterating that point. So obviously we want to engage people and not just talk at them. Otherwise, we might as well be a brochure. And a great way to do this, as many of you, of course, know, is by asking open-ended questions, which means that if someone can answer the question with a yes or a no or one word, then it's not open-ended, obviously. So the question should be open-ended to start a conversation about the organization, but it should not be open-ended for support. Okay, so you don't want to say, will you join us as a member? Because if they say no, then you've got nowhere to go. But you do want to ask an open-ended question, such as what initially drew your support to Naamat, or what initially drew made you decide to give up your afternoon and come out to a Naamat event. What's your connection to Naamat? Versus how long have you been a member of Naamat? If you ask somebody on a renewal campaign, how long have you been a member of Naamat? They might say 20 years. And then that's that, so, or 5 years. And then you obviously want to get back into a conversation. You might then say, oh, well, why did you initially become a member? What keeps you a member? That sort of thing. So getting back to asking for an amount. Obviously, it is important to ask high. And my feeling is if people say yes too quickly to your first ask, then you are leaving money on the table. It kind of broke my heart this one time when I still remember this years later, when I was coaching callers and I heard one caller who got a lead whose last gift was $10,000 to Habitat to Humanity. And the caller asked for $500 from them. And she quickly got it, as you can imagine. It made me sick. I literally had to go to the ladies' room. I was upset by this. But I remember this caller. Her name was Lori. It's a ubiquitous name. And she was struggling. Apparently, she didn't have enough money to buy a washing machine. And she was washing her clothes out in her bathtub. And I learned this later. Somebody explained this to me when I was so upset that she only asked for $500 from a giver that had given $10,000 the previous year. And so in her mind, she couldn't fathom that anybody could do more. For her, $500 was a lot of money because to her, she couldn't, she didn't have $500 to get a washing machine at that time. But a more confident speaker or caller would have realized that one person's $10,000 is another person's $1,000 is another person's $100 is another person's $25. I mean, it's all kind of relative. So, what one, the formula would have been maybe to see if they could stretch and do 25,000, because when you're in that league, often 10,000, 25,000, it's a matter of how much it moves them and where they decide to allocate those kinds of resources. So anyway, that made me a little sick because I thought, oh my gosh, that's a major loss to Habitat. But that's a good example of why it was almost sad because she did such a beautiful job in explaining the need. So, if you go through this rigmarole, whole Megillah, and you do a beautiful presentation of why the need is great, and then you ask for $10 or you ask for an amount that's a pittance, how important really is the need? So an important need deserves an important ask. And then that gives you room, obviously, to have a conversation and discount, or I call it discounting, because you're anchoring at a higher level and then discounting to another level, perhaps if need be. Or maybe people might surprise you. Sometimes there's a long pause, and whoever talks first, obviously, you know, one would say whoever talks first is the loser. So it's important to sometimes let people think about it. And if there's a long pause and then they say, yeah, I can do that, then you know you haven't left money on the table. Maybe you've stretched them a little bit, and that can be a really wonderful thing for a worthwhile cause. So if it's an important cause, an important ask is a good thing. And again, when you ask high, then no is to that specific amount and not everything. This is really important, because once you get a no to, can you join us as a member, then you've got nowhere to go. But will you join us at a member at the $365 a day level? Well, if they say no to that, there are plenty of levels below that are possibilities still. If you acknowledge, yes, I realize 365 is a lot to ask. I might even add, I couldn't do that myself. Let me tell you, then you tell them more case, and what about a more modest level of you might say 250, or you might say 150, depending upon how great the objection was.
Barbara?
And with that, I want to say, yes?
I just wanted to say, I think, I've attended a number of workshops on fundraising and getting to know your donor. You say the open-ended questions to find out more about them, whether this is a person who, what makes them feel good about giving, what makes them feel good about being a member. You may find out that this person may love being a donor, but doesn't like being a member. So that, so you have to really feel out a person. I mean, for somebody who gave 10,000, saying, we really appreciate, acknowledge, we really appreciate what you've done. And there's a project somewhat similar to the one you previously had given to. And we thought of you because you have been so generous in the past. And I'd like to discuss this new project that's coming up.
Yeah, exactly. So with that, I want to run through a few more techniques. I realize we're running low on time, but thank you for that addition. Yes, absolutely. It is important to find out where people are coming from, and they might be upset with the organization. Maybe they felt slighted at some event, and that's why they're a lapsed donor, because they don't want to, they wouldn't want to renew due to some imagined slight or genuine slight. And talking with them, you can make them feel appreciated and better about it, and focus them on what their money supports versus, having closed-fisted versus being open-fisted. And I used to hesitate sometimes to ask if people said they were ill. It would kind of stop me in my tracks. And then I realized in reading research studies that it makes people feel better giving. It can help people's health to give. It's a chemical release to give of dopamine, and it can work wonders. So it's not for me to make a decision. It's for me to give opportunities. And if people don't take me up on them, then so be it, but I shouldn't decide for them. So let me go through a few more techniques. I realize we've chatted quite a bit, and so I still have plenty of slides to share with you. I hope you'll bear with me, and I hope you find these ideas useful and maybe glean something new here this evening. So sometimes it can be tough to ask for high dollar amounts. So one thing you probably noticed I did earlier was saying, can you give it the 365 level? It's like $1 a day in support of Na'amat. So when you use the word dollar, you're actually talking about a lesser amount. So again, 10,000, can you help with a gift of 10,000? That's like $100 for each year that Na'amat has been in Israel. And actually, Na'amat is celebrating its 100th anniversary in Israel this year. So that would be an appropriate ask. So that can be a way around that. And you've probably heard that before and perhaps didn't even recognize it at the time. So painting pictures, we're talking about stories, painting pictures is really key. And the horse example is a good one. Here's another Nahmat mailing that has symbolic amounts. And and then I included a picture from the Connaught Youth Village when we were there. And so here, obviously, there are different amounts you can see there for school supplies and dorm room furnishings. The case for urgency, does anybody see that in the appeal?
Can't read it.
You can't read it. Can anyone see it?
You can see it, but can't read it.
Yeah.
All right,
I
I'll
see.
share. All right. So the case for urgency is the government cut off funding and now we have more students than ever. So that's what you would put in an appeal to get people hopefully to give today. And it's nice for people to be able to think about, oh, my $250 will cover a bed as opposed to just an amorphous $250. And the way you can get away with legally saying that is you want to say it would cover the cost, or it's the equivalent to the cost of. So you're not really saying it's definitely going toward that. And one example I'll give is back to painting pictures. When we were fundraising on behalf of Habitat for Humanity, a thing that I like to say was $100 is the equivalent to the cost of a front door to welcome a family into their new home. Now that paints a beautiful picture, but obviously I said that thousands of times and we didn't need thousands of, somebody's got to pay for the mortar and things that aren't as exciting, right? But it's a nice image. And so is bedding, even though, obviously Nahmat needs to keep the lights on and have water bills and, pay for other things that are maybe less tangible. So I thought I'd share a little bit of this video that I took when we were in the Connaught Youth Village, just with my phone. And there are wonderful symbolics here. And I have Shirley Shavit is the head of the international department who's speaking this video.
This is therapeutic horse riding. We have a lot of horses. They're in there. I'm not going to walk with you, but the big stable is over there. There are many horses, and it's also therapeutic riding, but not only. Riding horses is always good and great for adults and for children. So there are also the riding school here gives services also to the community. They pay. They come here and they pay for horseback riding lessons, okay? And of course, the priority is given to the students here in Connaught. Now they take care of the horses.
Okay, so there you go. Also, I did want to mention humor helps. Years ago, I was raising money for a political candidate, and we would somebody in the call center I was working in came up with this notion. They looked up the cost of a bus ticket to send the incumbent all the way home. And we would tell people the price of a bus ticket to send this person home from Washington, and people would laugh. It was $128, and people would laugh, and they would say, sure, I'll give $128. So you'd have $100 givers that would give 28% more because they would find that funny and like the image of it. Now they knew they weren't purchasing a bus ticket, literally, but they liked it. But we'd also have $50 givers do that, and even $25 givers that would laugh at that and give 128. So if you find a way to inject humor, that's very, very useful. I think I already covered asking for a specific high amount so that you have room to continue the discussion, to find something else that might work. Maybe another level of support, maybe an in-kind contribution, but that you want to get the no to an amount, not to giving in general. And it can be useful to have use some transitional phrases, obviously, to help people feel that they've been not only heard, but truly understood. And that allows one to finesse getting back into case, obviously. So Um, here are some examples. I appreciate that amount won't work for you. I would be remiss if I didn't let you know, and then you get back into something you want to share. That's back into case. I understand you're on a fixed income. For that reason, many folks like to give a smaller fixed monthly amount to aid, and then you're back into your case. Most people can't give 1,000, but we don't know until we ask. And I would say maybe, and we don't know until we ask, because sometimes but can dismiss an acknowledgement. So I wish I had reworked that. And we don't know until we ask. Since, and then you're back in to sharing a reason to contribute. Also, there's the thought of social norms being important to people. So one example is I've recently been fundraising where often my first ask is 500. And then I like to say many people are doing that as 50 a month over 10 months. And that is true. Many people are doing it that way. And it may be many people are doing it that way because I'm suggesting it. And not everybody obviously gives that amount of money. But of those that do, a certain percentage do give that way. And it's nice to know other people are doing it. We look to others to feel confident about what we're doing. Also, of course, we've talked about this very much. Personalize what you know. Based on what you know about the prospect, obviously you tell them reasons to give that are likely to persuade them. A very analytical person would be maybe perhaps moved by some statistics and figures, whereas a more emotional person might really appreciate hearing. A lot of people like stories, but hearing a story involving people. A lawyer also might appreciate hearing about legal work of Na'amat, that Na'amat lawyers advocating currently for daycare centers to be part of the Ministry of Education instead of the Ministry of Finance, so that daycare workers will be paid more like early education teachers. And Na'amat lawyers also challenged and won a case against El-At, as many of you may know, so that female flight attendants wouldn't be required to wear high heels on flights. So they won that case. And it's sad that that was only a few years ago, but there you go. And that's some of the wonderful legal work that Na'amat does. So if you know somebody who is involved in the law, telling them about that might be what moves them to come on board with Na'amat. So again, I want to reiterate the importance of acknowledging people, acknowledging their concerns, then perhaps using a transitional phrase to get back into your case, your reason for support, and asking again, giving them another opportunity, another level that might work for them, so that they do feel like they want to join. And I mentioned this earlier, and it is so true. Giving provides the dopamine effect, and it's funny. The other day, they can also be true in one's personal life. The other day, Robert told me he was going to go mow the lawn, and I said, "Thanks, babe." And and he said to me, "No, I want you to say it to me like you do to the donors on the phone." So I was like, "Oh, yes. Thank you so much, Robert, for mowing the lawn. It certainly will help with the beautification of our home." And he kind of smiled and appreciated that. But yeah, that's right. I owed him the full thank you and appreciation that perhaps would give him a shot of dopamine for his efforts. So
Thank you, Barbara.
you're welcome. So I'm encouraging you, whether it's for volunteers for their work, or the goods and in-kind contribution or financial support, obviously thank people. And
Barbara?
I do want to thank Deanna, Deb Cohen, my husband, and also Carolyn Turner, who gave me some feedback on an earlier version of this presentation. So thank you very much for attending, and I'll take a few questions, or if you have a few comments to make, now would be the time.
Barbara, this is Linda again. So I don't know how many of our people on board tonight were part of the happiness program that Brazil offered, but you said it in the beginning and you reiterated it right now about the positive effect of giving, and the beautiful thing that Professor Tal Ben Shahar said is that the word Natan in Hebrew is a palindrome. And when you give, you receive. And it's so much more.
It gets you every time, Linda.
What can I tell you? I love it. I love it.
Thank you.
Barbara, what would you say would be the beginning of a script? I'm meeting somebody for the first time, or I'm calling somebody for my Namat chapter. What would be the first line to warm up the conversation and get it more personal? I think that's what everybody fears, is that cold call. It's like, I don't know the person, but I'm asking. What would you say would be an introductory question? An introductory.
So a couple things. One is thanking people, acknowledging something they've done. So if it's that they belong to Hadassah and you think they might belong to Naamat, in the future, maybe thanking them for what they do now to support work in Israel. And that ACA format really comes through. Right. So then getting into, it's always best if you can find out from your prospect where they're coming from. So you might say, so what brought your support to Hadassah? And then if you hear, based upon what they share, then you know maybe where to go with, oh, well, did you know Naamat also has hospitals? Or if you care about children, there are daycare centers. There's different aspects you can follow based upon people's response. So I'd go back to
acknowledge. So you acknowledge that I really appreciate you're a member of Naamat. I appreciate you come to the meetings. Whatever you can appreciate about them. That
pretty much, yeah. And people do want to share, so you can ask them questions, open-ended questions. So what's been your experience with the media's coverage of what's happening in Israel? Or what's your perspective? There's a lot of things that you can ask that are open-ended that maybe get you a sense of where their perspective is, where they're coming from. So then you know where to go. And then obviously you want to ask high for a specific amount. So when they say no to you, it's to that high amount. And you even want to feel good when they say no to your first amount, because then you know you haven't left any money on the table, right? So it's just a matter of acknowledging their response to that, whether it's like, oh my gosh, I couldn't possibly do that, or just, why should I give my money to Israel when there's need here? Or, there's, so is it the amount that's the problem? Is it they didn't kind of buy the case being strong enough? So you kind of want to feel that out and do a little improv on where to go next. So that's where the dynamicism of the person to person ask comes into play. So I hope that gives you a few ideas of what to ask. You can ask, it's a little weird to ask people about them. I used to ask if people had children. I don't do that anymore. Just it's a different environment. So I hope that answers you well enough. Oh, yeah. Answers your question well enough.
Yeah, I think what the question about the kids is actually that yes/no question. You really want more open-ended.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
If a family may be important, so there may be a question about, about the values of family and asking them a question. But do you have children? It's yes or no.
It is yes or no. Sometimes if I'm making phone calls for support, I'll hear kids in the background and I may say, it sounds like you have small children. Perhaps you can relate to, and then I'm off and running, telling them about something that's child related.
Barbara, Deanna, let's see, Marcy says, when calling our members, I always ask about how they became involved with Naamat. I hear wonderful stories and they are happy someone wants to hear it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's in essence what drew your support to Naamat. That's a rephrasing of it. And I more naturally would say, what drew your support? But the way you express that sounds like your voice. And that's a great question. And it's wonderful to hear people's responses to that. And they give their, they give their own reason for giving in providing that. We remind them why they love the organization by giving them that platform to share that. And then we can celebrate that. I mean, acknowledgement, you know, should be also heightening, not just, you know, I understand why that's a lot of money, but also thanking people and celebrating with them if they share something like, you know, I've been doing a lot of fundraising for performing arts organizations. So when people tell me that they would go with their mother who's since deceased, or, you know, I mean, that's very moving that somebody feels, you know, is willing to share that. And I feel honored by that. And I also want to celebrate, like, wow, that's so wonderful that you have those experiences that you will always have, you know? So in any case, yeah.
Someone else asked in the chat, how do you know what level to ask as the first ask? And, you know, normally you might do research, of course, and if it's someone who you know and you know their history of giving, you might know about that level. But if it's someone who you don't know anything really about them, how do you know what level is the first ask?
Right. So if it's an acquisition campaign, then, you know, you may start at $250, the lifetime membership. You may start at $500, whatever it is. And if they say yes very quickly, then you thank them very much, and maybe go in and give them another reason to another case for support, and then say, you know, you said yes rather quickly to the $250. So I'm just wondering, given the fact that, and then maybe you know, the cost of outfitting a dorm room for a child at the Connote boarding school for disadvantaged youth would be $500 or whatever it is. Is there any chance you would like to stretch and do that amount? And sometimes people think and say, yeah, okay. And so you've bumped them up. You know, for some people, yeah, you'll get the sense, a lot of times in fundraising, there's benefits at other levels, right? So you might say, and as a special thank you for support at that extra level, you will receive blah, 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 blah. And as a perk to thank you for significantly bolstering, you know, and then if they say, no, well, you're still significantly bolstering Na'amat. So thank you so much for coming on board as a life member. You want to get back in there. And a thing I also should say is when people can't contribute, remember, we're planting seeds potentially for the future, and we're also just being mensches, and not everybody can give. So you do want to leave people with a good feeling in their mouth and thank them for their time, and wish them a wonderful rest of the summer, or whatever you would do. It is a little bit of an acting job sometimes, but I think it's important that you know, people that took the time to engage with us, that they feel acknowledged for that.
Barbara, I'm wondering, I mean, ideally, we do know the giving pattern in the past, but if we're doing this, we can ask those questions about, you know, your involvement in Na'amat. What was the most meaningful gift that you said that you've made to Na'amat? And somebody might say, yeah, I gave to spiritual adoption. You know, every year I would give 300. It meant a lot to me. And so then you know where maybe their giving level is, because they've now shared that they've given at that level and what their interest was.
Jan, I have to disagree with you on that, because I think people may not have been asked for more money, so they always gave 360 and people were very happy. And perhaps if they had been asked for more, they would have given more.
Oh, I'm not saying you can't give more, but I'm saying is that if you don't know anything about somebody, you may want to find out where this person was giving prior to that. So you're not asking for $18. That's what I'm trying to say, is if you're really a cold call and you don't know anything about it, you want to find out what their giving pattern was in the past and say, well, you could also then say, well, I know you have a particular interest in childcare. We have this big project. And then, as Barbara said, you could ask for that big number. And then you're just talking about the numbers, not the project, because you know that they love daycare.
I mean, if it is a current member or lapsed member, there should be the giving history. So you're not relying on them. And if it's an acquisition call, it is a little, you may, if you're buying a list, buy a list of $250 plus givers or $100 plus givers, or, and have a sense of what they've contributed to other organizations. So you have something to go from. You can notice people's jobs. You can look at people's emails and get information. There are different ways.
Barbara, there's a question from Selma Ruffman. Hello, Selma.
Hey, hi, Selma.
You are from Pittsburgh. How do we approach a large group of former Nahamat members who just lost their Pittsburgh council and aren't sure about continuing with Nahamat? Is it person by person?
Well, if you can, for sure, I'm going back to acknowledge case ask. As I said before, if you learned only one thing in this webinar, it's to use this framework repeatedly. So obviously acknowledging Pittsburgh members' many years of support of the Pittsburgh Council and what they've done in Pittsburgh, if you have access to that information, and giving them an update of what Nahamat is doing, because obviously they've cared enough to belong for so long, they should want the update, and asking for support. And then, of course, if it's too high, acknowledging that, going back in, telling them a little more, asking again until you find an amount that people feel happy to give, and then, of course, acknowledging that and leaving them with that dopamine effect of wonderful, you're still part of the fold, the Nahamat fold.
I think Selma was talking about just retaining them as members.
Think so.
And I'm fine with just retaining them as members. That's how you would do it if you were talking to them, whether it be on a Google Meet or over the phone or in person. Does that
which would you suggest we do? I'm in Cleveland, and I know that Felicia and I have talked about reaching out to Pittsburgh folks. And do you think it's better I think email is kind of cold and we don't know if they ever get it. And so should we call these people? Should we write them a letter? I mean, I would like to reach out to them and try and bring them
That was my.
Well, I guess I'll go back to my earlier slide of static versus dynamic. So I think you know my answer with that. I would say whatever you can do to make it more of a heart-to-heart versus a static ask. I mean, there are some beautifully written letters, don't get me wrong. And we have in Pittsburgh even commented that we've gotten some outreach from National that was quite lovely and moving. If you want to follow up on those and be a little bit more personal, then sure, a phone call would be great as far as finding out what drew people to Nahamat, what moved them about supporting Nahamat, and perhaps keeping them on board or helping them to feel included in the Midwestern region or the national. So,
Barbara, on another note, you mentioned buying lists, and that's always an interesting concept because we can reach our current members, and if we have X amount of members, we know we have that in common with them, and they know who we are. That's a little bit of an easier call. But as buying a list for someone who may or may not have ever heard of the organization, what is the success rate of that? And do you think that's best to do by a call or by a letter? I don't know. What experience have you had?
So direct mail does not have, much as people say they hate phone calls, if you reach people, the success rate is higher. I mean, a lot of people don't pick up, obviously, numbers they don't recognize, and that's why people try to get around that and use numbers that are in the same area code as the people they're calling. That's a tactic. But I guess my area of expertise has been the person-to-person outreach, and I like the fact that it's dynamic and you can adapt. And you can get very specific, especially if you're buying lists, as far as the data and the demographics of prospects.
Do you say that you're buying on the call? Hi, Barbara, I got your name from blah, blah, Hadassah.
No.
No, not generally. I mean, you could say, I mean, it would be, most people would know you probably bought the list if you were calling and saying, I'm calling because you're a Hadassah member, and I'm calling on behalf of another women's organization in Israel, because obviously we both care about families and in Israel. And then, going in, I mean, they might stick with you, they might not stick with you. There's a high amount of rejection in both instances, but for those, it can be beneficial. So in any case, I feel like that's a kind of a more board member question than general question, perhaps. I don't know. Yes, Leah?
Personally, if somebody told me they got my name from Hadassah or whatever, Ort or whatever, I would be mad at that organization for selling my name. And I might, and I may actually get turned off to that organization as well.
Right. I don't know for a fact that Hadassah sells lists, but many organizations sell them or they trade them. And it would behoove Hadassah to talk to Na'amat people that aren't yet Hadassah members, and for Na'amat to talk to Hadassah people that aren't yet Na'amat members. I mean, there's a logic there. So sometimes trades are orchestrated. The Sierra Club and the Environmental Working Group, they obviously have similar constituencies. So my guess is they trade lists. So we are way beyond. I was hoping for an hour. I mean, most of these things are about an hour. So I don't want to strain people in feeling polite and staying on. I'm so grateful that you have spent part of your evening with me. And I hope this has been helpful. So if there's a final question.
Barbara, I just want to tell you that we're something to look forward to, that we hear from Shirley Shavit. There may be in the future an international meeting of Na'amat women. And since you were at the convention, I hope that you would be able to join us on another trip where you could meet members from all over Na'amat members from all over the world, and that would be really good. And I was so happy to meet you there, and I look forward to seeing you at other times. And it's wonderful. It was a wonderful presentation. I want to thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you all very much.
Barbara, thank you. It's so good to see you.
It was a wonderful presentation. Thank you.
Very helpful. Very.
Yes.
Good tools.
Thank you. And please reach out. If you'd like the slides, I'm happy to share that with you. Thank you all so much. It's been great to see you and spend some more time with you.
Okay.
Great job, Barbara. And thank you all for attending.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Barbara.